processes and procedures in all of these areas in order to ensure a full understanding of the current context. We wish to applaud the people of Guyana for their patience in awaiting the results of the poll, and we encourage them to continue to do so. The mission looks forward to the publication of the official results of the elections at the earliest opportunity. The environment in Guyana prior to the elections was complex. Following the no confidence motion brought by the opposition People's Progressive Party Civic against the ruling coalition, the Partnership for National Unity and Alliance for Change. That motion was brought towards the end of 2018. The passage of the motion on December 21st, 2018, triggered Article 106, subsection 7 of Guyana's Constitution, which stipulates that if the government is defeated in a vote of confidence, elections must be held within 3 months or within such long period as may be approved by a vote of not less than 2/3 of the elected members of the National Assembly. Litigation regarding the validity of the no confidence motion extended this period to June 18, 2019, when the Caribbean Court of Justice, which is Guyana's final appellate court, declared that the motion of no confidence in the government was valid. The CCJ's further determination that the appointment of then chairman of the Guyana Election Commission, retired Justice James Patterson, was not in compliance with the Constitution further extended the interval while a new chairperson was identified and sworn in. By the time President David Granger announced the elections on September 25th of last year, 9 months had elapsed. The mission notes the concern expressed by the OAS General Secretariat at the time on this particular issue. In its engagement in Guyana, just prior to the elections, the mission was also seized of the following issues articulated by stakeholders across the political spectrum and among civil society, and I list them. The ethnic and political polarization which has so much and for so long defined Guyana. We noted the strong ethnic divisions in Guyana's social and political spheres, which were amplified by the rhetoric and competition of the 2020 campaign. While the efforts of the Ethnic Relations Commission are an important starting point in mitigating the discord between the two main ethnic groups, the mission suggests that deeper, more institutionalized measures need to be used to sanction discrimination, along with efforts to heal the evident estrangement between the two sides, and we think that this must be a priority for the next administration. The mission also took note of the efforts by GECOM to reduce the use of private residences as polling places and the concerns of the opposition PPPC that its supporters have been unequally impacted in this process. While the issue was eventually resolved in a manner that was acceptable to both sides, with the introduction of additional polling places in public places, the mission had some concerns regarding the lateness of the solution just 2 days before the elections. The majority of the stakeholders with whom the mission engaged expressed their concern about the length of time typically required to tabulate and determine the results of the elections in Guyana. The largely manual tabulation system, coupled with the country's geography, infrastructure, and population distribution, among other factors, can create significant challenges for the organization of elections and the timely delivery of results. It is recognized that Article 99 of the Representation of the People Act allows up to 15 days after election day for the declaration of the results of the election. However, extended delays by the authorities in publicizing official data created a window for the insertion of unhelpful speculation and uncertainty in the post-election period, as we have witnessed in the past. On February 21, the mission observed the conduct of the Discipline Services vote in Regions 3 and 4, and we were pleased to note the successful and orderly execution of this exercise. According to the Guyana Elections Commission, of the 10,226 eligible voters from the Discipline Services, 8,369 persons, or 81.8%, cast their ballots at 82 polling stations across the country on that day. The mission noted that the polling stations it visited opened on time and possessed the full complement of poll workers and materials required for the proper conduct of the vote. The mission was also pleased to note the presence of GECOM information officers at each of the polling locations visited, who assisted voters in verifying their places of poll and providing such guidance as was required. While the disciplined vote was widely observed by the international election observer missions present in the country, the OAS mission noted that domestic observers were not permitted to participate in the process. The mission believes that the strong desire of national civil society organizations to support the strengthening of democracy in their own country is to be commended and encourages the Electoral Authority to consider their inclusion at this stage in future electoral processes. And by at this stage I mean in the Discipline Services vote. On election day, members of the mission were present in 4 of the country's 10 regions, from the opening of poll, in fact from before the opening of poll, to the tallying and transmission of results. And we were able to visit some 344 polling stations. The mission observed that the arrangements and processes on election day were also well organized and mirrored those that we witnessed at the Discipline Services vote. Members of the mission reported that polling stations that they observed opened on time, they were fully staffed, and had the necessary electoral materials. In general, the premises housing polling stations provided sufficient space for the safe and secret conduct of the poll. The mission observed, however, that in some cases, polling stations were located on the upper floors of polling places, even where there appeared to be alternative spaces on the lower floors. And this, we found, created challenges for elderly voters and persons with disabilities. Visits to the polling stations established shortly before election day, these were the ones resulting from changes that were made to polling locations, suggested that voters were not unduly affected. The new polling stations were active, and GECOM's information officers were present and did a good job in guiding those persons that required assistance. While the mission saw long lines in the morning at many polling stations, people waited patiently, in most instances, to cast their votes, and by midday, most of these lines had disappeared. The mission was pleased to note the presence of several domestic observer groups, the members of which executed their responsibilities in a professional and respectful manner. Poll workers, the large majority of whom we observed were women, and I mean the large majority. They were diligent in their duties and knowledgeable about the procedures to be followed. The mission commends the electoral authorities, including the poll workers, party agents, supervisory personnel, and security agents who facilitated the conduct of the voting process on both days. But we note that in the absence of a preliminary result system, the outcome of the poll could not be known by the general public on election day or on the morning after this morning. Based on its analysis of the electoral system as well as the information it has gathered through discussions with national and electoral authorities, political parties, civil society, and the international community prior to the election, and based on our observations on election day, the OAS mission wishes to offer the following initial findings and recommendations. This is only a preliminary report. A final, more detailed report will be prepared and will be submitted to the OAS Permanent Council in Washington, D.C. Firstly, the structure of the Electoral Authority. The mission observed the polarization that exists between the members of the Guyana Elections Commission representing the two major political groupings. We observed the challenges that this created in arriving at consensus on most issues. The divisions appear to exert undue pressure on the chairperson and the use of his or her casting vote to resolve decisions before the Commission. We therefore recommend that Guyana engage in a multi-stakeholder discussion to deal with the structure of the electoral authority in order to enhance the deliberative nature and decision-making process of the Commission. Secondly, in terms of electoral organization, the work of the Guyana Elections Commission demonstrates a strong commitment to delivering a process that complies with the provisions of the prevailing electoral legislation. Also, the activities and processes observed by the mission prior to election day, including training sessions for poll workers and the consistently strong performance of those poll workers on election day, are to be commended. The mission, however, noted several areas in which the electoral process and system, and by extension the voters, could benefit from greater agility and in some cases greater certainty. We therefore recommend, as noted by the OAS mission that attended the 2015 elections, and in order to avoid long lines of voters waiting to cast their ballots, GECOM should consider introducing a standardized process that will allow the verification of at least one or two additional voters while one voter is casting his or her ballot. At one polling station that I visited, the officials would not commence the process of checking the identification of a voter, which then has to lead to the issuing of a ballot paper, the giving of instructions. They wouldn't commence that process until the voter who had preceded them had completed voting, stained his finger, and was in the process of departing the polling station. And this naturally led to delays and long lines outside the polling station. Secondly, considering the challenges surrounding the use of private residences as polling places in this electoral process, the electoral authority should review and resolve this question well ahead of any future election to ensure that the uncertainty generated on this occasion does not recur. People must know well in advance where they are expected to vote. Again, we saw situations where persons turned up at locations and had some difficulty finding the correct place to go because of the uncertainty that this created among some voters. GECOM should develop a detailed electoral time frame and plan that include comprehensive descriptions and protocols of the activities and documentation necessary to conduct oversight of the delivery of the statement of polls. It's an area that we feel could benefit from review and improvement. Guyana's largely manual electoral system requires the transportation of electoral materials, including the statement of poll, by land, water, and air to the returning officers in each of the 10 regions and to the Chief Elections Officer in Georgetown in order to facilitate the tabulation, the verification, and ultimately the declaration of the results of the elections. The only area of automation in the counting process currently occurs at the office of the Chief Elections Officer, where a computer application specifically designed by GECOM for that purpose support the tabulation of the results. We are of the view that technology can be much more helpful. Development of a technology solution that allows the collection and transmission of images of the statement of polls and collated results from regional locations to a central server location in Georgetown would allow Guyana to implement a more modern tabulation system which facilitates the publication of preliminary results. We therefore recommend that the Elections Commission should consider implementing a system to issue preliminary results for national elections in order to make this information available on election day or on the morning thereafter. This would include establishment of a central computerized results receiving center where election results summaries are periodically sent via secure telecommunication lines from each of the 10 regions across the country to the Chief Elections Officer. Scanned statements of poll can be sent to the CEO simultaneously to be published alongside the digitized electoral results. GECOM should also consider including a technology solution in the electoral system which supports the final tabulation of the results of the election. Official tabulated election results should be available online through the Electoral Office's official website to ensure faster and simultaneous transmission to a wider audience, including political parties, media, as well as citizens. This would promote the transparency of the election results. In addition, we are recommending the establishment of a help desk management system to effectively manage and control the delivery of electoral material, monitor and control the opening and closing of the polls, and manage the delivery of information and support to electoral workers and others. On the issue of the electoral registries, the official list of electors for the 2020 general and regional elections contained 660,998 names, a number that is relatively high in relation to the estimated population of Guyana, which is said to be 785,000, approximately. In explaining the reasons for the bloating of the list, the Guyana Elections Commission noted that it includes the names of persons who are dead or who no longer reside in Guyana. GECOM currently has no means of cleaning the list save through the constitutional provision for the removal of persons the death has been certified by registration, or where a person has been certified to be insane, or where someone has committed an election offense, and even then it has to be done through a claims and objections process. In July 2019, the Guyana Elections Commission commenced a house-to-house registration exercise in order to create a new national register of registrants database prior to the 2020 elections. The process was halted in August of 2019 after the Chief Justice of Guyana held that residency is not required for registration and that the names of persons already on the list of registrants and electors who were not captured during the house-to-house registration exercise could not be removed except through the constitutional provisions for such removal in the National Registration Act. GECOM has acknowledged that in these circumstances it will be challenged in conducting a review of the list. In order to assist in resolving this issue, the OAS mission recommends that comprehensive reform of the voter registration system, along with the necessary legislative authorization for registration, changes to the voters list, and submission of complaints about the exclusion or inclusion of voters be undertaken. Secondly, that there is need to undertake a house-to-house registration exercise at the earliest opportunity as soon as these election procedures are completed, and that there should be periodic house-to-house registration thereafter to ensure that the list is kept as up-to-date as possible. Voters who are at least 18 years old and who qualify to be placed on the official list for the first time should be identified during the continuous registration process, for which statutory provisions already exist. This would significantly reduce the number of persons in this category who would have to be verified as part of any re-registration exercise leading up to an election. Following an election, a person complaining of an unfair election or the commission of election offenses may, within 28 days, file an election petition before the High Court. The jurisdiction of the election court is special and exclusive in the determination of questions regarding the validity of elections. It is a parliamentary jurisdiction that is assigned to the judiciary by the Constitution and the legislature. While there is no time limit for the determination of election petition, it is something that we feel and we urge should be dealt with expeditiously. And we therefore recommend that the Elections Commission consider implementing a system. Some parties have complained about the length of time it takes to determine election petitions. For example, an election petition filed by the People's Progressive Party, Civic, following the 2015 election is still awaiting a ruling by the High Court. Even now, when all of that would have been overtaken by yesterday's election. And therefore the mission recommends that as far as practicable, every endeavor should be made on the part of the High Court to establish an appropriate time frame for the determination of election petitions. On the issue of campaign finance, financing of political parties and campaigns in Guyana is guided by the Representation of the People Act. According to the Act, candidates and/or their agents must submit a report on their expenses to GECOM upon the conclusion of the elections. The provision sets a limit on expenses of 50,000 Guyanese dollars, which is equivalent to 250 US dollars. That conversion indicates how antiquated those provisions are, and that's per candidate. The report on expenses is to be submitted no later than 35 days after the declaration of the results of the elections. The Act does not make provisions for disclosure of the sources of contributions received by candidates or their agents. There are no effective enforcement mechanisms. No expense reports are submitted by candidates. Although it is required by law, there are no limits on campaign expenses, no reports on contributions or donors, and no guidance on the use of state resources. In its discussions with political parties, the mission confirmed that there was support for the enactment of campaign finance legislation. And we therefore recommend, again, because we did so in 2015, that the existing legislation be revised and modernized to include clear limits on campaign spending, the identification of the sources of funding, the prevention of anonymous donations, and the limitation of private and in-kind donations to political and electoral campaigns. We feel that consideration should also be given to the inclusion in such a regulatory framework of state funding for political parties and campaigns. The OAS model legislation on campaign finance may be a useful point of departure in this regard, and it is something that we would commend to the Guyanese authorities. With regard to the political participation of women, let's recognize that Guyana remains a leader in the Anglophone Caribbean in legislating the political participation of women. It is the only country in the Caribbean that has done so, that has specifically legislated a minimum level of participation of women in the list of candidates. The gender quota introduced in 2000-2001 has positively impacted the inclusion of women in the Parliament from 18.5% in 2000 to 31.9% in 2016. And Guyana now ranks 40th in the world in this regard. While GECOM scrutinizes candidates' lists to ensure that they comply with the gender quota and rejects those that do not, there are no enforceable gender quotas for the persons that are extracted from the list to sit in Parliament. In Guyana, women are well represented within political parties. However, while women hold leadership positions in the women's arms of the parties, they are less well represented in the overall leadership of the party. Of the 9 parties or groups contesting the general election, only 3 had female presidential candidates. 2 parties fielded female prime ministerial candidates. While the Election Laws Amendment Act of 2000 dictates that in extracting names from the candidate list, account shall be taken, quote unquote, account shall be taken of the 33% quota, as well as the proportion that women are formed of the electorate. This is not a binding requirement, and it does not ensure that at least 33% of elected officials are women. There are no sanctions for failure to comply with this standard because it is not a statutory requirement. The mission therefore recommends a revision of the existing legislation to ensure that the extraction of members of Parliament from the party list ensures that at least the same percentage of women sit in the National Assembly as is required in the submission of party lists of candidates. As I indicated before, a detailed report on the mission's observations and recommendations will be presented to the OAS Permanent Council in Washington, D.C. It will also be shared with all stakeholders in Guyana. The mission wishes to thank the government of the Cooperative Republic of Guyana, the Guyana Elections Commission, the stakeholders with whom we met, and all the citizens of Guyana for their willingness to engage in frank and open discussions on the issues arising in the current electoral process. These discussions contributed significantly to the successful completion of the mission's work. We're also particularly grateful to the governments of Bolivia, Brazil, Chile, France, Guatemala, Korea, Mexico, Panama, and the United States for the financial contributions that they made, which made this mission possible. And finally, on a personal note, I'd like to express my own gratitude to the members of the mission who provided me with tremendous guidance and support in the course of our stay and the work that we did in Ghana. They're a good team, and the Secretary General of the OAS has every reason to be proud of them. Thank you very much.
So now we're going to be able to take a couple of questions. So if you could identify the media you will present today, that would be very kind of you, of course. Any questions? You have the microphone on.
Hi, Louise. So I'm Marshall President. I noticed yesterday you said that the OAS had made several recommendations in 2011 and 2015 that were not implemented. Aside from the campaign financing recommendations, if there were all recommendations listed that were recommended previously, and if not, what were the recommendations that were made back then that are yet to be implemented by now?
In preparing, I don't have it before me, and I wouldn't want to misrepresent. But certainly in preparing the final report of this mission, we're going to take a look at what was recommended in assessment as to the extent to which any effort has been made to implement them, or whether any consideration was given to them. And we will give that accounting in the preparation of this report.
Another question? Do we have some other questions? Oh, okay, sorry, I can't see you with the camera.
Good afternoon, the additional news. This year we have at least 4 elections equivalent for the mission. What do you think the mission is moving forward for these elections?
We couldn't hear one.
There are a number of elections taking place this year in Trinidad. I know there's going to be one later this year. What specifically your mission will do with that?
You have to deal with that.
That's the monetary missions.
Lesson learned for other missions. Lesson learned for other
In comparison
missions.
to other missions?
Yeah.
Here, lesson learned to other
Okay.
missions.
Thank you very much. In comparative terms, I would say that it's very commendable the fact that the Guyanese people are extremely enthusiastic about the participation that they have in this process. I would like to commend especially the role of women. I think that we have witnessed how women in the democratic process in Guyana are particularly enthusiastic and hardworking, and that's something that has to be commended always. As the Chief of Mission mentioned, it's also important to see that in the Caribbean, Guyana is given an example of the incorporation of women to the political process. Of course, there are many things that have to be solved yet, but in general terms, I would say that the role of women in the democratic process is quite amazing, and it's quite good in comparative terms.
Okay, so maybe the last question. Okay, so
Thank you very much.
thank you so much for coming.
Yes. It was good.
Pleasure having you here.
oh. So the crabwood that grow in Essequibo is we own. And the 6 o'clock bee and the Saki Winky is we own. And the lava that run from Govaya Gun is we own. And them Wallaba posts and the Coratin posts is we own. Wondery crab is we own. Truly Benam is we own. Umanaya is we own. Rikorila is we own. Arapaima is we own. Umanaya is we own. Whether Grover, whether Pleasance, we know Pagua and Confidence, and we know how to wine and prance. Why oh, and we celebrate Diwali, and when time for Mashramani, it's party, party, party. Why oh, yes, we know how to fet till the underwear wet. Why oh, so the crabwood that grow in Essequibo is we own. And the 6 o'clock bee and the Saki Winky is we own. And the lava that